Carlos Sainz breaks Verstappen's win streak, Mercedes masterclass until the final corners, and a car Lando podium. Let's get into the latest in the F1 world from the Singapore Grand Prix. Carlos Sainz has taken his second career Grand Prix victory under the lights in Singapore. It was a spectacular race from Carlos, and while a pole to win may seem simple, it was anything but. He held off Lando Norris and the two Mercedes on better tyres in a thrilling final stage of the race to bring an end to Max Verstappen and Red Bull's long-standing win streak. Carlos used some incredible race IQ to pull Lando Norris into his DRS in the race's closing stages, and used the McLaren as a defensive barrier to hold off the Mercedes pair, who were on fresher medium tyres and heading for an overtake imminently. Carlos said it was his idea to use Lando as a defensive barrier, and he knew that he needed Lando to hold on as long as possible, so backed him up into his DRS. This good car Lando moment, according to Carlos, helped the pair to the top two steps of the podium, in a move Lando said was very generous and saved him from getting overtaken by the Mercedes. George Russell's hopes of a win in Marina Bay were dashed by a mistake in the final lap. After running in P2 following the first pit stops, both George and Lewis took a chance in pitting for the new mediums they had both saved from qualifying and took off after the Ferrari of Sainz and McLaren of Norris ahead. From here the race came alive, as the top four all tussled for position over the final laps, and a win looked possible for George if only he could have overtaken Lando using his newer medium tyres. But into turn 10, George slammed his right rear tyre into the barrier, which sent him off into the wall and saw his hopes of a win vanish. After the race, George said he was lost for words, to be honest, as they felt they were half a car's length away from winning the race had they been able to overtake Lando when he had that one opportunity. In this heartbreaking turn of events, George said there was now a shadow over the whole weekend that could have otherwise been amazing, but reflected that the whole team had done an amazing job with the car and high risk reward strategy. In crashing out, George handed the final podium position to his teammate Lewis Hamilton, who despite the trophy said the car wasn't particularly enjoyable to drive and that he had ultimately not had that great a weekend. All in all, Mercedes were left wanting more from Singapore, but do you think they could have had the win? Let us know in the comments. Max and Red Bull's win streak has come to an end, as another constructor took the top step of the podium for the first time since Brazil 2022. Since the start of practice on Friday, Red Bull had struggled, but this persisted into qualifying where both cars failed to reach Q3 for the first time in 5 years, as Sergio ended the day in P13 and Max in P11. The team chose to take a risk with the strategy in the Grand Prix by starting both drivers on the hards and waiting for a safety car, in the hopes of recovering as best they could. But ultimately, the timing of the full and virtual safety cars was off for the team, and 5th for Verstappen and 8th for Perez was the best they could do. This didn't stop Max having fun on track, and he said that the second stint on the medium was better, and this was when he made up most of his positions. Max said, in taking the alternative strategy, you need to hope that it all works in your favour, and today it didn't, but he remains hopeful that they'll be back to peak performance in Suzuka. Sergio Perez's day was made worse by a post-race 5-second penalty due to causing a collision with Alex Albon in the race's closing stages, but he felt it was a racing incident. Despite this, Sergio commented that it was not a nice day and quite difficult for Red Bull, but like Max, he thinks the performance deficit in Singapore was a fluke and that they should be a lot stronger in Japan. We'll only have to wait a week to see if they're right. Fernando Alonso had a terrible day in Singapore as this race went from bad to worse with a penalty, a spin and a slow stop. The two-time world champion ended the day as last of the remaining drivers in what was a horrific performance for Aston Martin on an already tricky weekend following Stroll's crash and subsequent DNS. Fernando suffered a 5-second penalty for crossing the pit lane entry line. Then, when serving his penalty in the pits, he had an even slower stop as the rear jack couldn't get a hold of the car, and a lock-up and spin later in the race cost him any positions he might have made up at that point. Leaving Singapore pointless means that Alonso drops to 4th place in the drivers' standings, now 10 points behind Lewis Hamilton in 3rd. But despite this, the Grand Prix made Fernando the first Formula 1 driver to complete 100,000 kilometers in racing conditions, a staggering achievement amidst a difficult race. Speaking after the race, Fernando said it was an extremely tough evening. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and that he'd just like to forget about this weekend and focus on the next in Suzuka. Finally, on to Liam Lawson, who has earned his first points in Formula 1 and AlphaTauri's best race finish in 2023 in only his 3rd race. Liam was left wanting more from his qualifying performance around Marina Bay, despite getting his AlphaTauri into Q3 to start 10th on the grid. But today he got it and ended the race in 9th. Liam said he's really happy to have scored 2 points, and that he gave it everything. Liam's points finish is no doubt adding fuel to the dilemma AlphaTauri have in their hands as their driver lineup for 2024, particularly as Yuki Tsunoda suffered a DNF today after contact on the first lap. Whether Liam is back in Japan remains to be seen, but he's definitely making the most of his opportunity to race in F1. You're all caught up with the latest in the F1 world. What did you make of the Singapore Grand Prix? Let us know in the comments, like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to Apex for the latest in the F1 world.